Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I wish we didn't have to be here today, quite honestly. I wish that when SB 94 failed last year, Democrats would have just let that go. When it didn't have enough votes, when policy is that bad that they won't even bring it up for a vote in a supermajority Democratic legislature, probably a good thing to just leave that thing on an active file. But unfortunately, here we are. They revived SB 94 last minute with less than a week, or a little over a week to go in the legislative session. SB 94 is a dangerous bill that would overturn the sentences of some of the most heinous killers in our justice system. And I want you to think for a moment about the victims who were told at sentencing that their loved one's murder would do life without the possibility of parole, that would be the sentence. Many times, the death penalty was not sought, and instead they said, well, we'll accept a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. And they were told you will never have to go to a parole hearing and have to relive this all over again. They were told that by our justice courts. And the proponents of SB 94 want to turn that all upside down and say, no, we actually are going to take you back, make you relive that all over again, and have parole hearings that were never supposed to happen. These are some of the most heinous crimes. You don't get life without possibility of parole, without committing some of the most heinous murders. That's who this has been reserved for. So let's remember that. And let's remember those victims when we're talking about this proposal. And that's what we're doing here today, is we're giving voice to the victims, some of them who are going to speak to you shortly. But SB 94 is not justice. It's a betrayal. SB 94 supporters claim that their amendments will involve victims' families in the parole process. But that's one of the worst things about this bill, actually. These families were promised they wouldn't have to face that killer again. They were promised justice, and they're not getting it if they move forward and pass SB 94. Many people have actually already had to do this because we already did this for juvenile murders. And there are families right now, because of bad policy that was passed out of this state, that have already had to go through this. Now they want to expand it. And make no mistake, they're saying now, 1990 or earlier. They'll be back with a bill in a few years. If this passes, they'll be back with a bill in a few years that says, let's move it up. Because in reality, what they believe is that these people should be eligible for parole. They believe they should be released from prison. And they should state truly what they believe and say that to the victims. Say that to the victims. Stop hiding. This bill isn't just bad policy, it's an affront to the very concept of justice and to every person who has suffered at the hands of these criminals. We must keep our promise that these murderers will remain behind bars and where they belong. And let me end with this, because I think it's important. We're missing a lot of members today. They're at the Democratic National Convention. We are on the verge of Kamala Harris becoming the Democratic nominee for president. And I think it's an important question to ask. Where is Kamala Harris on SB 94? Where is Kamala Harris on these so-called criminal justice policies that have been passed here in California? Because we're hearing a lot about how she's a prosecutor. And I know where the prosecutors in this state are. They're against this bill. But where is Kamala Harris? She should be answering these questions. And Democrats in this legislature should be willing to stand up for the policies that they're pushing and be held accountable for them. But we have someone who is about to, be nominated for president that won't say. Where is she at on these policies? I think it's important. And the media needs to start asking these questions and getting answers. And all the way down. And this legislature, are they going to take this bill up? I really don't want them to, but I kind of hope they take it up because people need to know where they're at on these issues. And I hope we take it up and people have the courage to vote no and say enough is enough. It's time to stand up for the victims. And so today we are going to hear from some of those victims, and I hope that it's heard loud and clear when we vote no on SB 94. Thank you. So first up, I would like to introduce my colleague in the Senate who has been fighting this battle with us since day one, Senator and Senate Republican leader Brian Jones.
Thank you, Senator Gallagher. Thank you, everybody that's gathered here this morning. This is a solemn day, unfortunately, and it doesn't have to be. The actions that the Democratic leadership are taking with this particular bill, they don't have to take. They don't have to take this bill up. They don't have to address this bill. They don't have to bring this bill to the floor. They could have just, as Member Gallagher said, leave it on the inactive file. But they are purposefully bringing this up to shove down the throats of Californians. And I think you all know, and we all know, Californians are fed up with the crime rate in California. They're fed up with having to being unsafe in their neighborhoods. They're fed up with being unsafe when they're going out shopping. And this bill takes us one more step farther down the road of California being the most unsafe state in America. Senate Bill 94 is dangerous. As Member Gallagher hit it on the head, it's heinous crimes that these people have committed. Evil murderers that have committed these murders. Under this extreme policy, hundreds of the most heinous murderers would be let out of prison early, even if they were sentenced with life without parole. This harsh punishment is reserved for the worst of the worst criminals, the worst of the worst, most evil murderers in the state of California. Let's take a look at some of these murderers that are behind bars today and should remain behind bars, and we shouldn't even be talking about them today because the Democratic leadership is letting us down, letting all of Californians down. Richard Phillips of Madera County. Richard Phillips lured 2 Vietnam veterans into a rural area where he shot them multiple times, stole their wallets, then doused them in gasoline and lit them on fire. Think about those family members today. They're going to have to relive that crime over and over and over, as it's just even talked about today that this is a possibility that they might be up for parole. His horrific crimes against the veterans, nonetheless, Richard Phillips was sentenced to life without parole, and even after a 2019 retrial, he stayed in prison even after the retrial. Under the Democrats' SB 94, Richard Phillips would be eligible for early release. Another terrifying example is Jason Leroy Smith of Sonoma, who sliced the wrists of an 88-year-old victim and then burned down the house he was in. Jason Leroy Smith would be eligible for early release under Democrats' SB 94. One more example. Tim Dale Morris of Ventura burglarized the home of an elderly, deaf, one-legged man whom Tim Dale Morris beat to death in his own bed. It's people like Tim Dale Morris who Democrats want to release from prison into our communities under SB 94. I might take just a quick pause here to explain. Not all of my Democrat colleagues agree with these policies. And what Assemblymember Gallagher alluded to, and I'm going to ask today, is that my sensible Democrat colleagues reject this bill out of hand and it doesn't even get a hearing and come back to the floor. When these criminals brutally murdered other people and took their lives away, they lost their rights to freedom. They erased a life off the face of the earth. They don't get a second chance. These murderers are dangerous, they're evil, and they should never be released from prison. Last year, outrage from Californians effectively stopped SB 94 from moving forward. The amendments that have been talked about by the Democrats that want to push this forward haven't even been crossed the desk yet. They're talking about this to get all kinds of press and get all kinds of interest and get all kinds of attention to themselves, and haven't even taken the step to cross the amendments that they think makes the bill better, which absolutely does not make the bill better. The Senate Republican Caucus released our analysis on this bill last week. Many of you downloaded it. I encourage you to take those that haven't seen it, take a look at it. There's lots of excellent background as to why this bill is so dangerous and shouldn't be addressed. The Democrat leadership is trying to cram this down our throat in the last week of the session. We're not going to let them get away with this. These people are locked up. The Democrats are choosing to release them and let them out into our neighborhoods. We will continue to expose them and their radical plans to release violent murderers from prison and into our communities. I want to thank the media here today for covering this. This is an important issue for all Californians, and I hope every single Californian, all 39 point whatever million Californians, are paying attention to this, and let every single assembly member and every single senator know no on SB 94. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. So I next want to invite up first a victim. You're going to hear from a couple of them, but before I do that, I also want to recognize Harriet Salerno, who has joined us here this morning, who has been a voice for victims for decades, fighting in this legislature many times. And I want to recognize you, Harriet, because you've been an amazing voice. And out of a terrible tragedy, you have done a lot of good. And so we appreciate you, and it's great to have you standing here beside us today. So I'd like to invite up first Lauren Pettigrew from Crime Victims United, who's going to talk to us about her story and why we need to oppose this bill.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Pettigrew. I'm with Crime Victims United. I'm honored to be here as a voice for the victims and their surviving families. Victims of the most horrific murders in California, especially the ones where a special circumstance has been convicted, were promised by a judge that their killers would never be released and that they would never have to fight for justice from a parole board hearing. This is known as life without parole, otherwise known as LWOP. I'm one of those family members. My brother was a victim of a special circumstance murder in 2007, and all three of his killers are serving life without parole. Only criminals convicted of the most heinous murders would benefit from SB 94. They are guilty of first-degree murder in at least one of the 22 special circumstances. Examples include murder involving rape, kidnap, torture, arson, murder because of your race or religion, murder for money, murder with multiple victims. And it's because of the severity that these punishments are the life without parole at minimum. The only reason SB 94 does not apply to cases after 1990 is because of the difficult 2/3 vote needed to overturn the California voters. However, SB 94 feels like a stepping stone to releasing the sponsor's son who murdered my brother out of prison. At 22 years old, my brother's life was claimed abruptly by 3 individuals who chose to brutally murder him in his home. My family has been broken for nearly 17 years. We are truthfully haunted on a daily basis by what happened to him. Imagine having your only son or only sibling ripped away from you at the hands of another. We miss him and his big bear hugs every day, and we wonder what could have become of his life. My kids will never know their Uncle David, and one day I will have to tell them about the horrible people that killed him. And I hope when that comes, I can still say that you don't have to worry, these people will never be released. To hear that Senator Cortese has revived this horrible bill again is a total slap in the face to victims who were promised by a judge that their killers would never be released. It is a punishment that gives families like mine some closure. Senate Bill 94 is opening up the nightmare and anxiety of having to go back to court and see these monsters again, followed by the possibility of a lifetime of parole hearings. I am disillusioned and anguished, wondering when can victims mourn quietly for their loved ones without worrying about legislation that will reopen the wounds from their past. A prison sentence is about justice and a real consequence to which we should be able to depend on, and victims have a constitutional right to finality. No one at CVU is against these murders seeking to become a better human being behind bars. There can be nobility in that, and helping others who are going to get out of prison become better people is a noble cause. But we also have to have accountability in our society, especially for the most heinous murders. I urge Democrats to not overturn the hard work that our court systems have put into these cases, and put yourself into our shoes, and please vote no on SB 94. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Next, I would like to invite up Annabelle Velasquez from Empower and the Resilience Project and Justice Advocates Battling Exploitation and Lies. She is a survivor of human trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence. And she leads the nonprofit known as JABLE, she represents the Empowerment and Resilience Project at the Placer County District Attorney's Office. So Annabelle's personal experiences, including the tragic molestation of her daughter by her ex and the murder of her niece, fuel her to fight on to ensure justice for victims, and she does that every day. Annabelle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. SB 94 isn't just about resentencing low-level offenders. It's about rewarding people who have committed horrific crimes that have destroyed families and shattered lives. We're not talking about minor mistakes here. These are individuals who have inflicted unimaginable pain, leaving behind victims who will never fully heal, and some who are no longer here because of these monsters. And now we are being asked to give these criminals a chance to walk free, despite the horrific nature of their crimes, all because they've supposedly served enough time and are no longer considered a threat. But what about the victims? Where's the justice for them? SB 94 spits in the face of the lifelong suffering these families have endured. These just aren't criminals. They are monsters who have committed atrocities that tore families apart and left scars across generations. This bill would drag victims and their families back into the nightmares that they have fought to escape, reopening old wounds just to give these monsters another shot at freedom. We can't bring our loved ones back, but we absolutely cannot let these monsters get off the hook for the devastation that they have caused. Our justice system must stand firm in protecting victims and delivering real justice. SB 94 would turn that system into a tool for criminals, not a shield for the innocent. We need to stop this bill and stand up for those whose lives were destroyed, not the ones who actually destroyed them. Are we really going to turn our judicial system into a joke and confirm that California has become a criminal's paradise? Please do not pass SB 94.
Thank you, Annabelle. Next up, I would like to introduce a sheriff here in California who has been battling and trying to ensure that we have the resources and that we go out and enforce and ensure that there is justice for families. He's done a tremendous job on that front. Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco.
Good morning. I'm Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco. As I stand here this morning in front of all of you, I am torn between being in awe of our beautiful Capitol building and complete disgust for what goes on inside these walls. For more than a decade, Californians have suffered through an obviously failed social experiment of decriminalization, decarceration, and anti-law enforcement rhetoric. Californians are no longer safe. Our children are no longer safe. All because of a purposeful destruction of public safety in California by a progressive agenda from inside this building. For over 30 years, I have interviewed rapists, child molesters, and murderers who have committed the most heinous crimes you can imagine to another human being. They are not wired like you and me. They have and will always have zero respect for other people and for human life. They were convicted by a jury after hearing all of the evidence, who decided that these crimes were so heinous, the person convicted was handed a sentence that is reserved for only the worst of the worst. Reserved for the criminals who must be kept away from a civilized society to prevent further victims. I have looked into their eyes. I have listened to them speak their thoughts. These criminals will never be rehabilitated. We are here today to address nothing short of lunacy. It is more important for Governor Newsom, Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, Attorney General Bonta, and Assembly and Senate leadership to make cell phones in schools a crime than it is to keep violent murderers, rapists, child molesters, and kidnappers out of our communities. They repeatedly mislead you by referring to them as low-risk offenders. Make no mistake, SB 94 has nothing to do with low-risk offenders. SB 94 refers to the worst of the worst, top of the food chain, violent criminals who have committed heinous crimes. Justice is supposed to be about victims. Justice is supposed to be about victims' families. Justice is about a criminal justice system that protects Californians from those who do us harm. There is no place for lawmakers, politicians, or judges who do not understand that. There is no place in California for leaders who are not committed to holding criminals accountable for the crimes they commit against society. SB 94 is a perfect example of a misguided agenda that disregards victims and law-abiding Californians in favor of criminals who prey upon us. California public safety is in crisis, and Californians are less safe every day. It is time we demand government leadership direct the political agenda in this building in a direction that keeps our children safe, keeps our businesses secure, and criminals behind bars. On behalf of my deputies, all California law enforcement, every victim of crime, every family member of a victim, every business owner, and every law-abiding Californian, I am asking for the retraction of this bill and the public acknowledgement and promise from lawmakers, Senate and Assembly leadership, our governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general to end this misguided and failed social experiment immediately. This lunacy must end. Californians deserve so much better.
Thank you, Sheriff. And next, I'd like to invite up from the Senate Republican Caucus, Senator Kelly Ciarta.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to speak a little bit on this. A lot of my talking points would just reiterate what you already heard. So I'm going to go more on a personal level and talk about the victims that have to go through the process of this parole hearings every year. People think, oh, you know, they're going to be involved in the parole hearing process. You know, and that's the assurance you get from these bills. That's what's written into them. However, a close family friend of ours that I grew up with, his 4-year-old was killed in 2003, I think it was. And her killer was sentenced to 25 years to life. Do the math. 9 years ago, he started getting his parole hearings. 7 years, they denied it for 7 years. But now we put in the law for 24-year-olds. If you were 24 when you committed it, you get another parole hearing. And if you're over 50, you get another parole hearing. Every 3 years, they go to the parole hearing. And every year, he gets coached to answer more of the questions the right way so that he can be let out early. And he failed again this last year. But you know what they did? Right immediately after he was put on 3 years more before his next parole hearing, they have to get ready for the next one. And some of the witnesses to their particular situation, one of the main witnesses speaking against her own son-in-law, she's on her deathbed. She will not be available for that next one. And she's one of the ones that has such compelling testimony about this person. They are going to let this guy out eventually with all of this nonsense that we have been creating, where we are fighting for the criminals and against the victims. Because even though the victim themselves may be gone, their families and their friends like me have to watch over and over and relive the trauma of that day. It's not fair. We need to fight against this. This bill is an atrocity, and we need to ensure that all of our colleagues here in the Senate and the Assembly understand that and dispense with this bill. SB 94 is a ridiculous bill brought on with ridiculous intent. Thank you. Oops.
Thank you, Senator. And last, we have my colleague in the Assemblyman and in the Assembly and a former prosecutor, Assemblyman Bill Asaley.
Thank you and good morning. I won't repeat what the other speakers have already said. It's been very compelling testimony here today. As a former local and federal prosecutor, I've worked firsthand with the victims and their families. And what people need to understand is every time they have to go through the criminal justice system, whether it's a trial or sentencing or parole hearing, it is re-traumatizing for the families. It re-traumatizes them. This bill is not only insulting, it is hurtful to these families. And it is time we ask ourselves, are these people public servants or are they public masters? Who are they serving? What really gets me is we wake up every day. When I say we, I mean Republicans. We wake up every day and we say, how can we make the people of California's lives better? How can we make life more affordable, safer? How can we make their life more convenient? These Democrats are out of control. They wake up every day and they say, how do we make criminals' lives better? How do we get criminals out of prison? How do we empty the prisons? That's what they wake up and they think about every day. These people are sick, and it is time for the people of this state to rise up and to make your voice heard. What needs to happen is not to pass SB 94. What we need to do is bring back the death penalty. That's what needs to happen. The death penalty is the law of the land of this state. And I don't want to hear one Democrat talk to me about democracy. This governor, with the stroke of a pen, overturned the will of the people of this state, who have reaffirmed over and over again that certain people must die for the crimes that they commit. The voters have reaffirmed it. They've even voted to expedite the death penalty process. And the arrogance of these Democrats and this governor must be stopped. The only comfort these families will ever have is when these criminals, these killers, these animals are killed and they rot in hell where they belong. That's it. So I'm disgusted by this, and I think the people should call the author of this bill and every Democrat that dares support it and let them know how you feel about it. We're done with this nonsense. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And, as we conclude here, that was a very good point. This is the latest in a long line of terrible policies that have either been passed out of this legislature or by the stroke of a pen. That can't be understated. The death penalty was eliminated, not by the people. They affirmed it twice by vote. The people of California said, no, we need an ultimate penalty for heinous crimes. And the governor is the one who has effectively ended the death penalty. One person, overriding the will of the voters. Rape of an unconscious person is not considered a serious felony under Prop 57, which many of these Democrats have supported. Trafficking of a human being, of a kid, was not considered a serious felony until Shannon Grove said, no, we're not going to do this anymore and pass this through. This Public Safety Committee last year in the Assembly killed that bill on a party line vote. And only when the public outrage got so great and they were embarrassed did that bill finally get through and get a vote and pass as it should have. It's time to turn this around. It's gotten crazy, and this is only the latest example of that. And that's why, I think it's all the more important for this now nominee for President of the United States who's from California, who talks about being a prosecutor. Where are you at on this stuff? Not did you support Prop 47 back when it was on the ballot. Do you support it now? Because now we have policy to overturn it. We have a proposition to overturn it, Prop 36. Do you? Do you support ending the death penalty like your governor has done here in California? These are questions that someone who's running for president of the United States of America should have to answer. And all the way down the line, and then coming into this legislature where we're going to be having votes, where are you at on these issues? It's important for people to know. Because quite frankly, I think the American people and the people of California are tired of it. And they want to return to have real justice. And they want to focus on victims. So we have that opportunity. I hope this bill will go back to the inactive file where it belongs. But if it does come up for a vote, I hope that there's the courage to vote it down and that we start turning the corner on what has been a very insane time in our politics. Thank you for being here this morning. We'd be happy to answer any questions.